Maggie was crying while she was walking down the street. After years of trying unsuccessful fertility treatments, she just gave up on the kids by herself. She looked into adoption and finally found a good match: 3-year-old triplets. She signed the contract, but when she did a background check, she got the shock of her life. The worst part was that the triplets had already been in the care of Maggie and Tom for a bit of time now. They really felt like they had gotten a bond with the children. But now that Maggie had been confronted with the bombshell about them, she knew that she could not keep them. These boys had a lot more history than the adoption agency had disclosed to them. And the details of this dark history gave Maggie a feeling that she had never felt before. All she had wanted was to be a mother and to have a family. She was not ready to deal with all of this. These boys needed a loving and secure home to heal and grow, but Maggie and Tom weren't sure they could give them that. But what had happened in the triplets' past? What was so shocking about it? And will Maggie and Tom cancel the adoption over it? But before we start, smash the like button, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so you never miss out on our upcoming stories. It was a difficult time for Maggie and her husband, Tom. They were finally ready to start a family and had been trying to get pregnant for almost 5 years. First naturally, but when that didn't work, they looked into IVF. But after multiple treatments and going through almost all their savings, they still had no baby. They eventually realized that adoption was most likely their only option, even though Maggie was not the biggest fan of it at first. In her mind, the children would not be truly hers. A very tiny concern in hindsight is when the couple decided to go through with the adoption, it would bring a lot more consequences with it. One day they got a call about 3 little boys. They were triplets and desperately needed a home. Maggie and Tom initially wanted only one child, but they couldn't say no after seeing a picture of them. So, they agreed to come by the office and pick them up in a few hours. Suddenly, everything was happening so soon. They quickly tidied up the house, bought everything they needed, and got their room ready. When it was finally time to drive to the office, Maggie and Tom felt nervous. Their lives were about to change in a matter of minutes, and they really hoped it would be for the better. Maggie wondered about their story, but everything moved very quickly, and they were told a lot of different information. Before she knew it, they were on their way back home with 3 little toddler boys in the back of their car. This is so surreal, Maggie thought. But she felt happy she finally was a mother. The first week was tough. The boys had to adjust to their new lives, and so did Maggie and Tom. They had no experience raising triplets, which brought the expected struggles. But after the first month or so, things finally started to settle. But that didn't last long because one of the boys, Mika, started to behave differently. He started hitting his 2 brothers, Cody and Alex, and began to really misbehave. Finally, it became so bad that Tom had to remove Mika from the room he shared with his brothers because he wouldn't leave them alone. Maggie and Tom tried everything they could to make Mika stop. They tried gentle parenting, redirecting, and even therapy, but things only seemed to get worse. Soon, things started to go missing from the house, and Cody and Alex would suddenly have strange markings on their body. Maggie wondered what could have caused Mika to act the way he did, so she reached out to the adoption agency. But when she explained the situation, they told her there was nothing they could tell her. This confused Maggie. Why were they so secretive about the little boy's past? She told Tom about her worries and about the adoption agency not helping. They knew something had to change or else things could take a terrible turn. But since no one wanted to tell them anything about the triplets' past, they felt like they were on their own. They decided to order 3 online DNA test kits so they could find out if the triplets had any siblings or other family members they could get in touch with. It took a few days for the test kits to arrive, but when they finally did, they spared no time. They immediately swapped the triplets' mouths, put the swap back in the kit, labeled everything, and sent it back to the lab. All they had to do now was wait for the results. But that wait felt like an eternity, because during that time, things dramatically changed in their household. At first, only Mika was the problem child, but soon Alex started to act differently too. But instead of acting out and hurting his siblings, Alex began to hide. Sometimes Maggie and Tom would be unable to find him for hours, causing a lot of panics. It was almost too much for them. Finally, they got the long-awaited results in the mail, and what they read shocked them. It turned out there was one person who was a match in the DNA database, their father. Sadly, he was deceased. But there was one positive thing that came with the results: the father's name. They now knew who the triplets' father was, and with his name, they could probably find other family members. Or at least, that's what they hoped, because they didn't receive his full name. L. Roskovsky, Maggie read out loud. That is a good start, right? But Tom wasn't so sure. It didn't look very promising, but this was all the information they had. And there was no way they were giving up on these boys. So, they typed the father's name into Google. And what they would find online would turn their whole life upside down. When they searched the father's name on Google, they stumbled upon an old news article. The The article was a bit of a shock, as it described a big fire that destroyed the triplets' old family home. Attached to the article was a family picture of the mother, the triplets, who were about 1 year old, and their father. The article stated everyone got out of the fire unharmed, but that they never figured out how the fire started. They also never mentioned any name and only addressed the mother and father as Mr. and Miss Roskovsky. Let's reverse Google search this old family picture, Maggie suggested, and so they did. But when they reverse Google searched it, it only raised more questions. They saw a picture of the mother and father together, but strangely enough, the father had a different name, Arthur Sanderson, Tom read out loud. The worst part was that the triplets had already been in the care of Maggie and Tom for a bit of time now. They really felt like they had gotten a bond with the children, but now that Maggie had been confronted with the bombshell about them, she knew that she could not keep them. But little did they know they were about to fall into a huge rabbit hole. When they searched the name Arthur Sanderson, a lot of different articles popped up, but one of the articles really stood out. It was about a lost boy. The article was very old, but it contained a lot of information. There also was an address in the article, so Maggie and Tom decided to investigate further. They couldn't just leave the triplets with a babysitter, not now they were acting so strangely. So Maggie decided to go alone. She told Tom he could call her in case of an emergency, kissed the triplets goodbye, and drove away. After about 2 hours, Maggie arrived at the address. But Maggie was shocked when she looked at the house. It was run down throughout the years, and it didn't look like anyone had lived there for a long time. But Maggie wasn't going to give up. She walked over to a neighbor's house and rang the bell. She asked the neighbor if they knew who lived there, and if they knew where they had moved. The neighbor, an old lady around 80 years old, gladly let Maggie in and offered her some tea. Maggie, unaware of the crazy story she was about to tell, accepted the tea and sat down. Maggie listened as the old lady recounted a chilling tale about the family that once lived next door. A mother, father, and son had occupied the house, but they were peculiar reclusive, with the boy never attending school. Late-night screams often echoed from the house, but no one ever intervened. One day, a SWAT team raided the home, taking the boy, who was around 17 or 18, to the station. The family never returned, leaving their belongings untouched for over 40 years. Maggie was baffled why abandon the house and possessions. Could this mysterious past connect to the triplets' father? Thanking the old lady, Maggie left, her mind racing with unanswered questions. But Maggie didn't go home yet. She figured the one place that could tell her more would be that house. So she snuck around the house and broke in. Maggie knew she was breaking the law, but she just had to find out what strange past the triplets had. And it wasn't like anyone would be home, or so she thought. The house was old and dusty. Everything was left like they expected to come home that evening. There was a big pile of unopened mail on the doorstep, and it looked like the mother had been cooking just before the raid. There were footsteps imprinted on the dusty floor. Someone had been in here, and it wasn't long ago. Maggie's heart began to race as she slowly followed the trace of footsteps. They led her up the stairs and into a room. Maggie carefully placed her ear against the closed door to hear if someone were inside. And to her surprise, she could hear someone snoring from the other side. Consumed by the idea it could potentially be the triplets' father, Maggie slowly opened the door to peek inside. But old houses creak, and so did this door. So even though Maggie tried her best to be as quiet as possible, the man still woke up. The man studied Maggie with a sad expression as she cautiously introduced herself and asked if he was Arthur Sanderson. Though hesitant to reveal his identity, Maggie felt a strong resemblance between him and the boy in the picture, so she explained her search for the father of her adoptive triplets. Hearing this, the man's demeanor shifted and he admitted he was Arthur. Reluctantly, he shared his story. As a young man, Arthur had been arrested for robbery, driven by a need to fund his proposal to Becca, the triplets' mother. After serving his sentence, he and Becca started a family, but their situation was far from stable. Becca struggled with addiction, and to provide for her and their children, Arthur made a desperate choice. He faked his death to secure insurance money for them. The plan backfired. Though Becca received the money, her addiction worsened, and she passed away when the boys were only 3. Arthur, legally dead, was unable to return to his sons, leaving him heartbroken and powerless to help them. Maggie listened in shock, moved by the tragic tale of loss and regret that shaped the boys' past. Maggie had heard enough. This was way worse than she had expected. She knew she promised Arthur to adopt the boys either way, but she just couldn't, not after hearing his story. Once home, she explained everything to her husband, and he agreed with her. They had to cancel the adoption. It was a very difficult decision, but Maggie knew it was the right one. She and Tom weren't the right parents for the boys, but they knew they would be placed in the right home. Tom and Maggie felt they had to tell Arthur the news in person, so they drove to him together with the triples. Arthur was very surprised to see them when they arrived at the house. He cried happy tears seeing his boys again. But then, Maggie and Tom told him the news. But it wasn't the news you'd expect, because they had set up the surprise of their lives, and it involved Arthur. They had registered Arthur as an adoptive parent, but not under his real name. No, under the name he had created for himself. They had explained everything to a social worker, and after bribing her with some money, she ruled Arthur a fit father for his boys. Maggie and Tom knew they couldn't live in that old house, so they offered to let Arthur and the boys stay in their guest house until he found a forever home. That way, the boys could still see Maggie and Tom, and Arthur could slowly adjust to being a father. And in the end, everything worked out for the best. Thank you so much for watching. If you enjoyed this story, don't forget to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the notification bell so you never miss another unbelievable tale like this one.